Hey guys, this episode we're talking about rate limiting in Rails 7.2, and today's episode is sponsored by Tuple. So we're going to jump on Tuple, and I'm going to call Kent, and he's going to walk us through some of the new Rails 7.2 functionality. So just a second here, we should hear from Kent. Hello. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. So yeah, I'm gonna request that you share your screen.
Sure.
And let's dig into that rate limiting stuff we were just talking about.
Sure. Sounds good. And looks like I have my messages up here. Let me just close that.
Excellent. I love that tuple app fail.
Yeah, it's nice.
So cool. The rate limiting feature is a controller before action, basically, that we can add to our request. So it looks like you've got a post scaffold up here.
Yep.
Is that right? So
Yep.
we could apply the rate limit on just the post controller if we wanted to just limit a specific section of our app, which might be common. Like you might want to rate limit your API or your authentication or something. But in general, once people are logged in, you don't really care. So we could apply this in our application controller, but you know what? Let's put it in a specific location to kind of simulate that. Let's put it in our post controller. So the method call is called rate limit, right?
Yes.
So it looks like rate underscore limit, and then there are a couple required options. Two, which is kind of the maximum amount of requests per whatever. And so if we set it to something low like 3, we can simulate much more easily than having to make 1,000 requests. So if we set the rate limit to 3, we also have to specify the window of time, right? So we say within X number of minutes. Something like 1 minute is probably good, maybe even 30 seconds.
Per minute?
Yeah. And then it looks like you're missing a comma and a symbol there.
Of course. Thanks.
Let me draw the comma in for you.
Thank you.
Excellent. And I believe that's it, right? Like that's if you want to just use the rate limit with most of the defaults, this is all you really need to specify.
Yeah.
Because this will use the Rails cache behind the scenes to store the data. And out of the box, this is going to use the remote IP from the request. So whoever the client IP address is, it'll use that and create buckets for each individual remote IP client IP address. And then that is what keeps track of this IP address made 17 requests in the last 30 seconds. So they're no longer allowed to make requests. But then another user, separate limit and everything. So that is pretty much how that works at the very basics. So if you want to run your Rails server, we should be able to hit that post controller, any of those actions, and they will run against our rate limit. So we'll make, hit refresh like 5 times, and we'll see if it rate limits you. And you don't have to fill out anything, but this will work for post requests and everything else too. But if you want to just hit refresh, you can make those requests real quick, and we can see if we can get past that rate limit. Now, you've made more than those 3 requests in 30 seconds, and it's still letting you go through. So the reason for that, so that people understand how this works, is that behind the scenes, this is using your cache. And out of the box, in development, Rails does not have caching enabled by default. So that's why you're still allowed to do this stuff, even though it is technically enabled. So if you open up your Rails console or your terminal and you run Rails dev :cache, that will enable the cache. You don't need the Rails console, just
Oh,
the
sorry.
Rails
Right.
dev cache command. Sorry about that.
Oops. Rails.
And
What?
it should be Rails dev cache, I think.
Gotcha.
Yep,
Oh,
there we
good.
go. Development mode is now being
Cool.
cached. Excellent.
Ooh.
And now you can go back to your browser and refresh, say 5 times. And hopefully, what you will see,
Boom.
the 4th time, you get
Oops. Uh-oh.
this right here, which is an empty page.
Mhm.
And we'll look at why that is and how we can change that. But by default, it's going to use head and 429, which is too many requests, HTTP status. And it's using head, so there's actually no content being sent back, which is typical of what you might get from a rate limiter. It's just going to say, hey, sorry, we blocked you. We're not going to render anything. And that is that. But we can actually go and do anything we want there. So we could render a template if we wanted by customizing the rate limit. And I haven't really seen too much documentation on that. So that might be a fun thing to look at next. But before we do that, you had set this up where you added the width. Is it right? The width?
Yeah.
Or no, by. The by option. By colon, and then a lambda, which overrides the sort of grouping of the rate limits. So one of the examples was like request.domain.
Yep. Okay.
And that would just set it up so that everyone who's accessing the app through that domain will be sharing the same rate limit, which is a weird thing. No one, I think, is going to normally do that. Request the client IP address is much more typical, but you could do this with, say the user's logged in and you do this after they've authenticated, and you could say, hey, this API token is limited, and you could have different limits for different tokens. That could totally work. So that's an option as well to consider. Something like that might be a different way of, instead of just per client, you could get DDoS by that still, but maybe if you have an API and it's like, hey, you've got 1,000 machines using the same API key, we want to treat all of those as a shared bucket for rate limiting. That could work too. So something, more, it's figuring out exactly what the correct limit here that makes sense is going to be up to you in your application. 1,000 for 30 seconds is a lot of requests. So, some of the examples were kind of like 3 in 1 minute for authentication or something. Probably not unreasonable. If you had somebody with a password manager, though, they could attempt to log in much faster than that. So it might be like 5 and 30 seconds is actually a really good limit of, authentication or something. And you can also spread this out and say like 10 within a minute or 20 in 2 minutes. And then your bucket will reset every 2 minutes instead of resetting every 30 seconds. So they could do a whole bunch of requests real fast and have to wait 2 minutes until it resets, versus every 30 seconds they have a new opportunity to try and, hit the limit again. So it's kind of nice if you want to set the within to be a higher number and say like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and you're allowed to attempt to log in 20 times in 10 minutes. So then if they do the 20 attempts or whatever, then they have to wait the rest of the 19 minutes or whatever it is before they can try again. So you want to do that within reason, but the longer within bucket kind of makes it where you can distribute your requests however you like within that, and then gives you a more back off or whatever. So pretty cool little feature. By default, uses the Rails cache to store that. And when you run that Rails dev cache command, it enables the file store cache. So it's just writing to disk, but you can change that to Redis, solid cache, you name it. You can store any of the Rails caching locations or cache stores will work. You can also specify the store option here with that. And that allows you to set up a unique store directly for this rate limit, and it will go and use that over the Rails cache store by default. So that's an option as well. If you want to have a separate, you could actually set up a separate SQLite database with solid cache and just have a rate limiting database if you wanted, which is a great option actually.
Yeah, that's cool.
You want to pull up the Rails source code and we'll take a look at how this is implemented. So if anybody wants to find this, I always go to this box here and look for rate limiting. And you'll find the concern there. Yep. Under Action Controller Metal. And I think as we talked a little bit earlier, this is surprisingly complicated, right?
Yeah. Goes on. It's a lot of reading. It can take you a while.
It's so funny. Like, it is one class method, a few options, and here is actually where it defines that remote IP for us. And then with option, which we were talking about earlier about how to customize the response, by default, it's going to use head too many requests, but you could render a template and then say status too many requests, and it will render some HTML, but actually return the same HTTP status of 429, which is what you want. And yes, the store is the cache store by default. Same with the allow browser. The rest of the options are actually applied right here to the before action. And the before action is using that Lambda approach here, which is great because that allows you to pass in options into your method call inside your before action. So they just pass everything along. Rate limiting method down here takes those. It uses your cache store, needs to implement an increment method, takes the cache key, which evaluates the by lambda or proc or whatever you give it to it, and then takes the string it returns back, adds it to the cache key, increments by 1, and then sets the expiration. And that's it. And then if you have surpassed the allowed count, the maximum of 2 is what it's going to check against. And then if that happens, then it's going to fire off an event for instrumentation. And then it's going to evaluate that with block or lambda inside your controller, which allows it to render or call head or whatever else that you might want to possibly do here. And that's it. There's really nothing to it. I love it. Yep. It's pretty slick.
Very cool. Yep. It was fun seeing the old pull request too, and how it was a lot more than this originally. It got worked. This,
Because what did it use originally?
Credits, I think.
Yeah.
Or one of the options.
That's right. Because it was like an explicit dependency on Redis. And then someone, Casper is fine, made a pull request to rewrite it to use the cache store, right?
Yeah.
And I think it required a little bit of update to the file cache store to support this increment option. But everything else supported it, it looked like. So that allows you to now equally use any file, Redis, Memcache, solid cache, whatever else that you might want. Oh yeah, there's a good example of using a custom store for a specific one there. And even a redirect as an alternative to the 429 head. I like it. So yeah, this is I mean a wonderful feature because in the past, like you had to use Rack Attack and add Redis and whatever else that you might want to do in order to pull off rate limiting. And with Rails having such a simple, clean implementation, it just like makes sense. Like every authentication
Yeah,
controller method, like why wouldn't you put
probably the
this in
main
front of
use
it?
for it.
Yep. Or
But if you
API
had a large,
requests.
yeah, if you had a much larger site with a lot of traffic, though, it still might be a good idea to use Wayfirst or Rack Attack
Sure.
in general.
Yeah. You
A
you
more
will probably
fine-tuned control
still
and
be better off at a application,
mm,
firewall type rate limiter thing before it even hits Rails
yeah,
at scale, but
yeah. But for most
totally,
apps, great.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally fine for the majority of
yeah,
apps. Or if you just want to
mm,
see if this is even a help,
yeah,
you can do this with one line of code and then decide
mm,
later, like, okay, if we
yeah,
definitely need more than this, then go
mhm,
implement it, at a higher level or something. But yeah, I think it's a pretty sweet thing. It works
cool.
really well.
Yep.
The only thing that I can think of is maybe long term, I could imagine that the to and within,
Mm,
I could see these being lambdas as well. So if
mm,
you ran your authentication and you said, "Oh, this user has a separate limit," um,
um,
that could be an option as well.
mm,
Like this is a flat set of values, but I could see that being customizable
mm,
by providing a lambda for those and saying like, look, if the current user is an admin,
mm,
we can rate limit them to
mm.
999 per second or whatever, and the rest of users get like a regular thing. So that could be a good pull request to Rails potentially.
Yep.
You wouldn't want to complicate this too much more. It's so elegantly simple right now, but I
Yeah.
definitely think like, if to and within respond to call, then maybe it makes sense to instance exec them or something,
Mm,
and then get the return values from that, possibly. But you could also, now that I'm thinking about it, you could also just set up separate rate limit lines. They would probably not accept that PR because you could just have
mm,
two rate limit lines and have an if and
cool.
say if current user is admin, or unless current user is admin, and just don't rate limit admin
Right.
users. So
Mm, mm,
that would probably be the better way of doing that, just explicitly defining each of those instead of
yep.
having them configurable.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think? Seems like a great little feature to me.
I like it. Yeah. I think it's my favorite of the new 7.2
Me
features.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like
It's useful.
such
Nice.
a common feature to have in your applications that
Yeah.
was sort of figure it out yourself. Good luck. And
Yeah.
I mean, for the amount of bots and attacks that you get from people trying to exploit WordPress and whatnot,
Right.
it makes so much sense to have this built in. I'm
Yeah.
very, very happy with this.
Thing.
So
Yeah.
cool. Well, thanks for sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Thanks to Tuple for sponsoring this episode. If you want to
Yep.
get 30 or 50% off your first 3 months
Mm,
with Tuple, you can use the code GoRails at checkout and get that discount and try it out. We use Tuple all the
oh,
time.
yeah.
Can't
Every day.
can't recommend it enough. These annotation features and being able to type code and stuff on the screen instead of trying to explain comma, space,
Yeah.
symbol, whatever. Like it's so much easier to just use Tuple
You can
and
also
annotate.
take over each other's keyboards too, which is nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
we'll have to do that as well. But honestly, it makes this feel like we're pretty much using our own screen,
Mm,
which is what none of the other screen sharing
yeah.
tools can accomplish. It really doesn't feel like a separate thing, a separate application. It feels like you're just there looking at the same screen together. So shout out to Tuple.
Yeah.
Thanks again, and use that code GoRails at checkout.
Mm.
And I will catch you in the next episode.